p.m. My name is Rick Nez, Chair of RDC. We'll call this leadership meeting to order at this time. And also, Mr. Tahi, would you do the roll call, please?
Chair, members of the committee, this is roll call for the Resources and Development Committee leadership meeting with DNR. Nomination in DOJ, OOC, DOA, LOC, OMB, and DCD for August 16th, 2021 at 2 p.m. Ricky Nez. Ricky Nez.
Delegate Nez is on the call.
Thomas Walker Jr. Thomas Walker Jr.
Mr. Tahi, did you get my name, Delegate Nez?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And go ahead.
Herman Daniels.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Key Allen Begay Jr.
Delegate Key Allen Begay Jr. present. Thank you.
Mark A. Freeland. Mark A. Freeland. Wilson C. Stewart Jr.
Present.
Chair, you have 4 members present.
Thank you, Mr. Tahi, for the roll call. We're down to invocation on the agenda. I would like to ask Honorable Begay, if you would do the prayer.
Chairman, good afternoon, other RDC member. Here at Olesado Kodosha Hawaii for the invocation. Oshin Kodo, Nitsa Zindikishi, Obena, that the Adopina Tashinka 8 to the Hades and Adoshi Benita and the coalition. Let's go ahead and do a prayer. Here I got Yashan Lon Kodo. This and out of kitchen. Oh, yeah, now the need of this. Abenda Chenan Hinsit Ado Howard Yago Naniska Arabenda Shanti Benikinat and Slad Ado Kodo Nchedat Nasam Kai Behadat Ado Kodo Nikishot Haki Quaggin Hasam Kage Nahanilla Hadashim Hadeshi then Equagi Bake Itlado. Quaggin he in any Zinki Kudon to go here in his Zidon Lisas Shingaya Ashokandone Ado Kodo Resource and Development Committee of Diego did on it so the Hinanish Inison Ado Kodo Nhata is and the Koton hit and then give Paneta Payet Napayet Ishin has the chapter has odd. Net age battles and asked for hot A at the hot A. Odi Kodot on the Honanish lad on Listo on the Nanad Naad Liskat Hala. And get the Nego go China Lido out of us on Ishibe. Bench in a hot A or Shahita ah, hit Nego being hit Yansky. I got a baby not to go Kodo this year. Hit Nedland Ligo Banda Itness. Each chapter has odd. Now, Loshin Lily, that is a baby in a hot egg, and ye quite a ski. Yet a hit off, has it sad or less. Other yet a hit I could open on your send or less. To Ecuador, local elected officials, and then give it a Banais scandal list, though, Okadon and Anadna Adalisca. I could eat ego Kodot, so there's an Lenigi. That's an estrado list. Nahakolia, Kodo, Denli, other Ishi to Yada, It's on the Queen's and God. Ada Kodona Najiat Honita, Yitas, and its east. But it's seen under has done the Kodo Nazi Hoge. Kodoshi be here. Obench in Kiska, Kodit Ego Kodo Todazin. Bench Hanana Street on less. Ada arts or conscious Nad and Dini. Ada Kodo partners the chapter officials. Ada Kodo grazing official, farm board, right? Ashi. Been on the each and every day. But we thank them, but we just ask for your strength and guidance to continue forward, to do our best to do our duties on behalf of our Navajo people. Ado Kodo, my Kodo RDC member, Ado elected officials at Windrut level that ask for Kodo. Benedni Dobanashni on this God, Ado Kodo, my community members, each and every one of them, ask for Kodo. Taba Ada Holia, Tabke Dajutle. Tanas net Ziata hit our Kodo. Choho and Lini be, Nitas and Netado, this God. It is hit in the has Nahuit A. At the cost, and Sahatnigin Nada. But what end in the sheet A, and Spahos and Beninani, the hot A. Out of the habits around the world, God. Out of course, the weather and the Kodo, they do not need us, not a husband. It's Ashinko. It's unusual, no, to buy that, but nonetheless, God, we always say, and I always say that it's the creation of how God created the world. What end the Shinkodo on the need to the God with I Kodo. But there's a lineage asked isn't behasi only the Lahaslava or Slava, and it asked for it. Yat Ehishan and Lado Lech, other issue betchit and Slado betchit, so that it's a nice case, other betchit and see asked for Ekodoshan as a queen lado Lech, Kodoyat Eho Ekodo, Nanas Limita, Anam Slado, this could Ago Ekodo, yet as I use Shinigi bin the carbon and I could on it. So there's a Dinigi Behanana seat of Lech in Jesus' name. Amen. Chairman.
Thank you. Here has Sula, Hudson Zeniki. But our Rebe has a creature, Hudson deeds are like Winton. Aroshik, a chronos, none at all. On the agenda, we have introductions. We'll go to RDC, honorable members of RDC first. I believe Honorable Walker's will be calling in shortly. So we'll go with Honorable Daniels. Are you on the call? Honorable Gay.
Chairman, again, nonetheless, again, I could state an audit non strong on it as I need us to say out of this Chinese and other 5 taps that I represent a low mountain touchable gap, Salonica and what North and many farms. But I'm Jada, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Freeland. Honorable Stewart.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Shanai, Doshan, Chairman Nez, Arosh Jayaja, Walker, Arosh Shanai, Kenan, and Dosh Mayaja, Ken, Arosh North Angus afternoon, Chair Wilson, C. Stewart Jr. and Chia, Quetzoni and Shla, Nanish El Touchini Bashashin, cutting this chair between the Shanella. Again, good afternoon.
Yeah, Shea, Rick Nez in Shia Wasanin, Snow, Zaytchin, Bashish Chain, and Hobbit, Lash Cherokee, on it, Shanella. Without and then Sino has Tonga chapters, Panash, Shakea, Hogback, San Juan, and Hizara, Perfulum, Burnham, and Newcomb. Welcome, everybody. Arnold, yeah, Tato, okay, get on our funny. Mashank, Raw, RDC staff. Ms. Begay.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Resource Development Committee. Shami Begay and Shada. I'm the Resource Development Committee Advisor. And Na Kairin Enchlan the Betlishan Beshin to buy data should change touching data Shanalada 8 Sun Enchlan, Lay Samuel, Arizona, Danko Enasha. Mr. Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Begay. Ms. Woody?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Ado RDC members, Nkiro Ano Toyat, Asia, Teresa Woody, and Shiro Taban, Shlo, the Bethlehem, Bushes Chin, Kiane, Dash Cherots, and Jenny Dashanana, Hot out a RDC, Bittend Dash legislative assistant, Anshlanko, a Hihan, Hidini Dole, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Woody. Ms. Khan? Mr. Tahi?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This is Mariana Khan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Oh.
you. Go ahead, Ms. Khan.
Thank you. It is raining here in Window Rock and there is some lightning. So I will be on the call as long as possible. Yad et also she Mariana Khan da shejene. Don't nishlinigi e to he glini nishne but ani washish chin lash chin dashe senjikin dashanala. I'm very happy to be with you here this afternoon. I will go on mute now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Mr. Tahi?
Good afternoon, Chair, members of Resources and Development Committee. Name is Rodney Tahi. I'm Kiani and Senjikine. I'm originally from Steamboat, Arizona. Back to you, Chair.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chair,
Mr. Tahi. Honorable Daniels, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was muted early. I may ask you, but Kudo Herman Daniels Jr. I don't know any but Ani. The son that is there. I don't know he had Lenny that should say. Now, Kate and it doesn't say out of that. As can't vote as not at all. Or that mentioned on a great all J Todo not of those Todo to be can banastas. Or that needs to have a bit of less. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Daniels. Honorable Vice Chair Thomas Walker, you have the floor, sir. Yes, thank you, Chairman, committee members, and his staff, listeners, audience, meeting participants. Thomas Walker Jr. The Western Navajo Agency, Bana Shagi, Loop, Tulani Lake, Cameron, Coal Mine, and City chapters. Don't Shiniki, a Shinhin, none of beef at all, is that. That is another Dashachegi, it was something. I could echo. So, yeah, Hinani Kregishan, and thank you. Thank you, Honorable Vice Chair Walker. Do we have Honorable Freeland on the call? We'll move down to the Office of the Controller, Ms. Elizabeth Begay. Mr. Robert Woolley. Anybody from the Office of the Controller on the call? Navajo Nation Department of Justice, Ajwa. Anybody from the Department of Justice?
Good afternoon.
Okay,
Good afternoon,
Mr.
Chair. With DOJ.
Could you restate, sir?
This is Roderick Begay with Navajo DOJ. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This is Mel Rodas from the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ.
Thank you, Mr. Rodas. Anybody else from DOJ?
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Catherine Belzowski from Navajo DOJ.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belzowski. Anybody else from DOJ? Okay, we'll go to Division of Natural Resources, Dr. Rudy Shabala. Mr. Leo Watchman. Anybody from DNR?
Leo Watchman with Department of Agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman, for getting on the call. Division of Community Development, Dr. Pearl Yellowman.
This is Banji with Natural Resources. I'm on the call.
Who's this? Could you state your name again?
This is Banji Curly Thomas with Natural Resources.
Thank you, Ms. Curly Thomas. DCD, Dr. Yellowman.
Good afternoon, Chair Nez and honorable members of RDC, Shay, Pearl, Yellowman, and Shea. We have various staff from DCD on the call as well. We have ASC and SPPS staff on the call. We may have a member or so from CPMD, but we are on the call, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yellowman. Ms. Jim Martin. None. Let me go to Speaker's office. Ms. Yako.
Hi, good afternoon, Chairman Nez, members of the Resources and Development Committee. My name is Melinda Arvizo Siako. I'm on the line here from the Office of the Speaker in Window Rock, Arizona. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Yako. Dr. Shabal, are you on the call? None? Anybody else on the call? Please introduce yourself.
Chairman Nez, this is Delegate Amber Kines-Makrati. I'm on the call. Thank you, committee members. Kia ani nishlevo bilagana bashichin, destiny deshichido bilagana bishanele. I had Chairman for the conversation, and I did invite my district to listen in on the call. So thank you, chapter officials who are on the call. I'll go back on mute.
Thank you, Shamayaza. This afternoon. Appreciate you getting on the call. Honorable Chair Crotty, certainly appreciate you getting on the call. Any of our colleagues on the call? No? Hakushila. We'll move right along here. Any grazing officials on the call? Mr. Roland, so are you on the call?
Russell Smallton, not
Mr. Small Canyon, not Sasando, yet, anybody else?
Hello, this is Brittany Hunt.
Hello. Go ahead, Brittany.
Brittany Hunt, Shantwa the Bevanat and Schlendo, Killachini, Bushing, Killachini, Schlingo, Nashashe, Bushing, Ashe, my dish, Gizzy, Dashichedo, Ashkushne, Dashanale. I'm representing District 2-3. Thank you.
Brittany, what did you say your last name was?
Hunt, H-U-N-T.
Hunt, okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hunt. Next.
Daniel Williams.
Mr. William, go ahead.
Yes, Tony Visit. I represent Cuba City chapter grazing official. But next slow, put it in, but my dispute that's another touching it as it say, what out the next. So, I say,
oh,
Good afternoon, Chinanta. Good afternoon, Chinanta. Kenneth Johnson, grazing official from Navajo chapter. 23 National and about this chain.
Good to have you on the call, Mr. Johnson. Yeah.
You bet. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Leslie Williams from Trelawney Lake chapter. Yeah, everybody that called in to the treating something with 20, but it's saying, hello, Piani, that's a Chedo, Senachini, that's another. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Next.
This is Robert Willie from the Office of the Controller. Good afternoon, everyone.
Mr. Willie. Appreciate you calling in. Thank you. Anybody else?
This is James Sadek from Community Development Division.
Could you restate your name? May you restate your name?
James Sadekai from Division of Community Development.
Okay. Mr. Adekai, thank you for that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, hello, this is Jonathan Nance, Yenta grazing official.
Next.
Stephen Wagner, Chef. City Toronto, grazing official.
Thank you. Next. None. Hakushila. The purpose of our meeting today, this leadership meeting, was scheduled to have a discussion by RDC, who requested this meeting with the Division of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, the Controller's Office, Department of Justice, Division of Community Development. And this meeting is to discuss how we can transfer the grazing officials program from DNR's Department of Agriculture to Division of Community Development. So in the past, the grazing official stipend payments were handled by the local chapter houses, and that was changed to where it's at now. The RDC committee would like to know if a historical update be provided to the committee, and whether if such a transfer of a program is feasible within the fiscal year 2022 budget process. May everybody please put your phones on mute. Your phone mute. Thank you. Yeah. So this in Koroban yes and it Linigi and a rating the Bebenant Aberdeen Ninigi stipend between Salahaki and a rate hotnas Nilla as the chapter house the Adoshin between land Adoshin Hoshten or the Dashi again a rate Department of Agriculture to go be at Ango A Adam between like a Kodidigi hate all a Hakati request as ne Kodo hate all a Bohnet Zansh the grazing official lay chapter that what not neko coid on Zago Taga hot sun go back all the water. So eo combat all the water toy that's the Beniga. A cohate all the Korobandit into wait ha bend the deal sto hot don't need to say han hit na don neto banacha ha Bonet Zash Ile Gisabana Department of Agriculture Nature Biasa Ala Johut Egaban Sah Kesto Nabikia Titon Hisnahadon Nashin Kodo. So at this time we'll have this presentation and discussions, but first we will have the first presenter to talk to the issues of IRS audit findings and settlement. That will be by the Office of the Controller, Ms. Elizabeth Begay or Mr. Robert Willie. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Robert Willie, Accounting Manager with the Office of the Controller. I'm here to speak about the IRS findings in relation to the Navajo Nation. Back in 2010, March 31st, there was a presentation to Council which stated the results of the IRS examination. There were several issues that were looked at by the IRS, one of them being board commissions and stipends. IRS conducted the examination on the Navajo Nation 2005 tax year. And they conducted it over a course of 2 years. So they presented their preliminary results to the Controller's Office and to Budget and Finance. And there was a settlement made in relation to the stipends specifically. Boards and commissions, they were receiving individual stipends every 2 weeks. Grazing boards was one of the instances in which this was found. At that time, the Navajo Nation treated these individuals as contractors, but the IRS came back and said that these amounts are wages and should be fully taxable. So the IRS settled on the amount, and they gave us a break on a couple of the years, if I can recall, and that W-2s would be issued on all future wages. So that's why the current process and practice of the stipends going through payroll is now being followed. So that's the relation of the IRS findings as far as the grazing officials and stipends. I'm not sure how much detail Department of Justice has on this, but I know that the attorney at the time was Marcelina Gomez, and the controller at the time here was Mr. Mark Grant. So all I could find was an old presentation that was done prior to this. So that's what I have, and I can forward that to the reporter and the chair if the committee wishes. And I'd be happy to help entertain any of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willie. Before we move on, I believe each A, B, C, D we can stop and have a discussion and questions and questions and answer period. That way we fully understand all the presentations that will be before us today. Are there any questions or comments for Office of the Controller, Mr. Willie, on the IRS audit findings and the settlement?
Chairman Kiel.
Honorable Begay, go ahead.
Chairman, I guess the question is, Mr. Willie Yahodnaki, I believe we're not. It's good that we're getting an update on the situation of the finding. I mean, will that be the case? Transferring the stipend of the grazing officials from one program to another program where locally it will be administered. I believe we're not changing the status of the grazing officials. All we're doing is the administering of the account by one program to the local program. And I guess what the resource development, the the Department of Ag's duty, Yankee, is assumed, it will be assumed by the local chapter administration. So, but if that's gonna if that and that's gonna change the status of the stipend, then I think that that will provide us additional information to say that, well, taking it back to the chapter will change the status of the distributing the stipends to the grading official. Is that why we're being? That's the reason why we're getting is being addressed to us. That we were in the same situation as far as delegates. That was a different situation. Which is understandable. No. So anyway, that's my question to Mr. Willie. Will transferring the account from Department of Agriculture to the chapter through the Division of Community Development will change the status of the stipend process? Chairman.
Thank you for your question, Honorable Begay. Mr. Willie, your response. And also, Mr. Willie, when you respond, could you kind of slow it down, because we have grazing officials on the call that would probably like to fully understand how all this took place. Mr. Willie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Delegate Begay's question, so the transfer of the stipends would move from agriculture to the actual chapter, correct? If that's so, I believe the chapter would have to do the reporting as far as to the IRS. I would probably need the input of DOJ and probably Legislative Council, but the chapters are still part of the nation. So I would assume that they would still have to pay the taxes on those because they were deemed wages. So if I could have their input, but as far as changing it, the process, I believe it would stay the same. They would still report their meetings along with the documents needed, submit those, and then the payroll cycle through the chapter would have to process those documents. That's my understanding of how Honorable Begay is speaking to the transfer. So that's my answer for now, but I would like input from the legal side of it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willie, for your response. Honorable Begay, do you have a follow-up?
Chairman, yeah, I guess there needs to be a clarification on this particular, the purpose of today's meeting. Yeah, the IRS finding, I don't know if any of us as our RDC member needs to be informed to article up and I guess it's okay. But I believe it really shouldn't affect what we're trying to do. Stipend. I think we're talking about stipend. Grazing officials for their meetings. 8A CEO transfer from the Department of Agriculture to the chapter. That's the ultimate goal of what we're going to try to do, Dita. But if it's going to be administered by the local chapter, is going to change. That's where my question is. The stipends at the chapter level are the administer, it's going to change their status for thought need. She, Jabin, General, what that a could take into Department of Agriculture, which of Nadia, Johanna, she is that been not that. Joe Quaggy, she that's Joe Bahal, Binti Bach was the Chairman. That's my, I guess, follow-up question to either OMB or to the Department of Justice. The status, the changing, will it change the status or how they administer the stipend for those grazing officials? Chairman.
Okay. Honorable members of RDC, the agenda that we have before us, the first part of A is the IRS audit findings and settlement. B is IRS settlement agreement update by the Department of Justice Tax Unit. C, Division of Natural Resource and Department of Agriculture internal stipend payment processes. They will expound on it. They will expound on the direct deposit for grazing official stipend payment, and will DNR allow the transfer of the grazing official program to DCD? That's a question that needs to be answered as well by Dr. Shabala and Mr. Watchman. What will the impacts of the transfer be? That also needs to be brought to our attention here. Aro DCD, DNGD, they're willing to accept the transfer of the grazing official program or not, but they'll talk to us about it. They'll tell us about the impacts of the additional responsibility of the division staff. Under E is the transfer of program from one division to another division. What will be the proper and legal process? Can the transfer be achieved during the Navajo Nation Council budget deliberations, of which we currently are doing? But at this time, if we'll go to B, IRS settlement, perhaps we can just go back and forth between the two, the Office of the Controller as well as Department of Justice. So at this time, we'll give some time over to the Department of Justice, Tax Unit, Mr. Rodas or Mr. Begay or Ms. Belzelski. You have the floor. Mr. Rodas, perhaps you can go first. Ms. Begay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir. I think.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, this is Mel Rodas from the Tax and Finance Unit. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for that before. I was listening to Mr. Willie present earlier, and I agree with his statements. The previous IRS audit was, I believe it began in 2009 or 2010, and it covered audit period 2005 to 2008. And then the settlement agreement was signed by Mark Grant, former controller, in 2011. And the main issue there was whether agricultural officials should be treated as independent contractors or as Navajo Nation employees for federal employment tax purposes. So the question wasn't whether they were regular status Navajo Nation employees, with full employee benefits, but just whether they should be treated as employees for tax purposes. And the IRS concluded, and the nation agreed through the settlement agreement, that the nation was to treat agricultural officials as employees for tax purposes. So we agreed to do that in 2011. However, it turns out that the nation didn't actually reclassify agricultural officials to be employees for tax purposes until much later. So the IRS did a second audit of the nation, and that began in July of 2017. That lasted until May of 2018. So the IRS discovered at that time that we had yet to reclassify agricultural officials. So in the context of that audit, the nation began reclassifying not just agricultural officials, but officials of many other of the nation's boards, commissions, and committees. And so their stipend payments are considered wages. And when OOC processes the stipends, it goes through payroll section as opposed to accounts payable. The travel reimbursements still go through accounts payable, but the stipends go through payroll and are treated as wages. Employment taxes are withheld, including Medicare and unemployment taxes and income taxes. So to Honorable Begay's question, would the status change if this were transferred from the Department of Ag to the chapter level? My response would be that the chapters would still have to comply with the settlement agreement from 2011. And the chapters, in my opinion, would be bound by that agreement because they are a political subdivision of the nation. And the chapters would have to continue treating the agricultural officials as employees for federal employment tax purposes. They wouldn't necessarily have to be regular status employees, but they would have to be employees for tax purposes. And so the withholding would have to continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rodas. Let me give some time to Mr. Rod Begay. Mr. Begay?
Oh, yeah, I think what I will add to Mr. Rodas's presentation is that we still have 65 chapters that are not yet governance certified. And that's important because personnel or the handling of salaries, that for those chapters, they're processed through DCD and through payroll. And I don't know how many of the 45 governance certified chapters process their own payroll. And that's important for tax purposes because in order to maintain compliance with the settlement agreement, that means that all chapters would have to learn basically how to deduct those mandatory deductions. So that's the only thing I'll add for now, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I can also stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Begay and Mr. Rodas. And let me go back to Honorable Begay for your follow-up.
Chairman Keal and Nana, again, so what we're trying to do is eliminate our grading officials to go back and forth to Window Rock, to have the stipend funding be available or be distributed locally. at the chapter house. That's the overall intent of this particular meeting, to get the information and the proper process that we're going to do. We're not, there's no intention to change the status of the grazing officials. There's no intent to change any, maybe the administering of the current processing of what Department of Agriculture is doing. All we're doing is transferring that stipend funding to the local chapter. And yes, the chapter will continue to do what the IRS will be doing. But the question will be now is that will the Division of Community Development be able to assume another responsibility of an account on behalf of the chapter, and how the chapter needs to start administering? And I believe they're capable already, because they're doing it for the local 3 chapter officials, and then some doing for the farm board members. I would be thinking that they already are doing it. Aside from being certified and not certified, being not certified, but certified chapters, I believe they already have their internal policy in place of how they administer these funding. The finding by the IRS, I just don't want them to think that should be another delay in what we try to do. So the IRS, we just got to comply. We're complying with it. The current Department of Agriculture complying with it, and yes, the local chapter officials, the local chapter AMS and the CSC will comply with this process. So I guess that will be my basic response to all the throughout the day. So it's just a matter of, yes, it's doable, and it can be done through this budget. I guess the key thing that I'll be listening out throughout today, Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Begay, for that. Mr. Rod Begay, as far as you mentioned how many of the 45 LGA certified chapters are working with the settlement agreement that was gone forth. Who would have that answer? DCD?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I would defer most of the administrative process questions to DCD.
Okay, we will get to them when we get down to D. But honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions on discussion A and B?
Chair, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Honorable Stewart. You have the floor.
Chair, and Mr. Rodas, Mr. Begay, Mr. Willie. The question I have is that from the presentation we received today from the 3 of you, do you believe that it is doable to move these funds from Department of Ag to the chapters, considering we still have chapters that are under sanction? We still have chapters that are not complying with current situations with their accounts. And then knowing that at the chapter level, we have some officials that are controlling the chapter staff. That would be my question, because if the answer is no, it's not feasible, then I don't know why we would consider even entertaining to move the funds to the chapter, because to me, I would like to see a chapter fully in compliance before we give them any more additional funds to say, okay, this is what we're going to entrust you with because it's the nation's funds and you need to comply with it. Therefore, you're going to get these funds. I understand there is the difference between the non-certified and the certified chapters, but I want to know from your expertise, is it going to be feasible to send it back to the chapters, knowing that we have a history with IRS that we just barely got those resolved not too long ago from what I am hearing. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Stewart. Mr. Rodas, may you respond, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, for the question. I think that it would certainly complicate things a great deal to transfer the responsibility for paying agricultural officials to the chapters. I'm not saying that it can't be done. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but it would create some complications. And as Mr. Begay mentioned, there's the distinction between the LGA certified and the non-certified chapters in terms of processing payroll. And then the other factor is that my understanding is chapters are not currently treating chapter officials in terms of the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer as employees for federal employment tax purposes. And so now I don't know if that's true across the board for every chapter, but that's just my basic understanding. And so if the chapters were to treat agricultural officials as employees for federal employment tax purposes, but not treat the regular chapter officials, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, as employees for federal employment tax purposes, then that could raise the scrutiny of the IRS and potentially invite an audit. So that's another issue to consider,
right?
In terms of inconsistent treatment of different types of officials.
Please put your phones on mute. Thank you. Mr. Rodas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions on A and B? IRS audit findings and settlement agreement? None? We'll probably come back and refer to them as we go to DNR, but before we do, Honorable Vice Chair Walker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, Chairman, though, committee members, although presenters, although Dyson, Gito, Debinal Sospenant, Anofinigi, that echo, Reggie Craigie, I guess sort of along the lines of what my brother T. Allen Begay is talking about. Joko along those same lines, streamlining, the processes. Just I would look to DCD, though, DNR, the administrators, the process the way it is today, can that be further streamlined without additional costs, without additional, I guess, maybe everything has a cost. Everything costs money, Hanisha. If we change the processes, even if we were to simplify or, like I said, streamline, that's I think the aim for some of us is streamlining the processes that should not take a lot of time, although that should not take people traveling unnecessarily, all over the place, chasing down documents. we are in the digital age, technology age. I know that everyone is keeping up with that or advancing in that area even as we speak. Ko na sos na ja. Asit abigata shinigi hat nota. So while we could digitize some of those steps, I would look to the divisions to figure that out. Maybe this is time just to ask the divisions to figure it out, find ways to streamline, simplify, reduce the time it takes to pay elected officials. I appreciate the historical information and why certain officials are deemed as employees. Put in the streamlining. I guess that's what we're talking about to me. And I would again look to the administrators to help figure that out. Present that to the oversight committee, so that then we take that. Make that put that into the books. Policy makers, legislators, all that is good, the intention's good. At the end, our administrators, the executive branch, that's what they're there for. Thank you.
Yes, and aro taisnoft age the bebenant no seniki corona the kitten leniki the quigo shins kehuna go coron sistudesh asen senchotide and HS lage the bebenant no seniki the chapter the bananas is on and HS law and or next spala the IRS the Zito nas kahans sagobanach enigo yaha did at in the ocean yaha the employees ekobas all cut or less all tax but can't be hit niki a whole lot on niki a chapter the store out is either lesigi benigedo a coid on a great chagahot san gon says all was go a toward the doslet go a hun bandan of other dollars a koi yaha Adonan ago, which dopa hunt eco door nisiki koropa yet hito koro request alian and honorable kial on the gay koroye ya yastio a hunza hohol jisto koro RDC beshmahas anigi and bohonet ashpiga gosh at dos bohonet zara hate all aliago bahunt it all less arakro honorable Stewart yaha zigi da is not on nego ha. Do you believe that it is doable? But don't in a way gatit I don't know how tanata dish big or hash bonet zash what out as neko an a way tanas nil baganda ada holneko ada hati the babanant an leniki arab as last bonet za fala ada ha. The national gate or sato bananas is Hans so she dish staff again a lot to know ya heart see a cocorone so night a kitten lenigin and honorable Vice Chair Walker Yahanana Zido Kado and Nego ya igisiba Nate indication at and that nil ego a streamline orliga a core benny a hot orliga streamline a Donan ago nage did bahun tekodo achiko arabana nashasando aro height arabahun jot all streamline a host in which is lot of and you no a koro baha or z did streamline or geheki so did a hun sagon his corrosion or less the babnant are not senigi aro dice not a pro I believe that we'll give some time over to Mr. Leo Watchman. Press star 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, committee, also officials and staff or who may be on the line, I appreciate the time. According to the agenda, I guess there's a question posed to where we're sitting in the agenda, basically asking for impact from this, possible transfer. Also, whether is DNR in favor. I'll answer that, but I think there's some history to where this had begun, or also some of the I guess important information not mentioned as a part of the settlement, or also the funding history. Over the years, the officials were never received monies, or there was never appropriation to the chapter. I heard that said it was a one to the chapter. There was never appropriated chapter in probably 25, maybe 30 years. There's been attempts over the years to maybe fund, but it wasn't realized. But there was a memorandum agreement that was put in place for about maybe 10 years. Basically, when the Nomination Council approved the annual budget, it went through Division of Natural Resources, Agriculture. Then there was a memorandum agreement that was put in place with Community Development to transfer over 2 stipends in which the chapter essentially administers, or they conduct. That would be the planning meeting and also the regular chapter meeting. All other stipends have historically always been appropriate to DNR under Natural Resources to part of agriculture. That's a misconception that it was once at the chapter level, only under a memorandum agreement, but it still was appropriated and budgeted through Natural Resources for at least 30 plus years. Secondly, one of the reasons, and it's real key to moving forward, it wasn't mentioned as a part of the controller or DOJ, is that the settlement also, one of the key components was supervision. And I went down as arguing against the settlement because the supervision is quasi. The IRS basically said that the Department of Ag has supervision over these officials, which we don't. The people have. That's a key component that changes them from a contract employee to a quasi-employee of Nomination. We still believe that they're a contract employee because they're taxed on everything. So one of the mentions that was mentioned by DOJ for tax purposes only, but it's really essentially I guess a negative for the officials because they're taxed on all, even their lodging as well as their meals, as though it's income. So that's always been an argument moving through each budget cycle that we've had and said we'd like to change that. But again, as we move into the chapter level, some of the key things that have to be looked at. Supervision. Right now, the plan operation of the Department of Ag, we have supervision over the stipend for performance, and we can withhold a compensation. But we can't say instruct the official to do things. We can just recommend. So it's key to compensation. So moving to the chapter level, one of the things that we have difficulty today is that I don't know if they'll expedite. It might be easier to say I don't think they'll be paid to the chapter because majority of the chapters use the biweekly payroll, and that's really the issue we have. When the document's put together, it still has to meet a payroll cycle, and that's real key to being proficient. And I'm not sure if community development would like or are engaged, and they'll probably talk to that. We have 3 employees at the Department of Ag that administers the fund, or these funds, for all of the 141 elected officials. And they basically, every week, meet a payroll deadline, whether it's early or the normal deadline. So in that instance, I think, I'm not sure if we're trying to be proficient or we're trying to get the funds available at the chapter to be expedient to the compensation, but there still has to be some form of checks and balances. Are they really attending a meeting? Are they servicing the community? These things. And that's probably what maybe the chapter is concerned with. Maybe, I'm not sure if all chapters are for. So when it comes to DNR, whether we're for or against, I think proficiency, yes. There's been a long struggle of trying to fund these officials who are very important to Navajo way of life and how they fit in our government. But the compensation is really tough to deal with. What is the level? And I think that's been posed in some of the hearings we've had before. What's the adequate compensation? Right now, and this is the challenge we have. Since we are now paying a stipend by this being elected, meaning that an official gets $800 and someone will get $600 every week or every month. I'm not sure if that's been, it can measure to more proficiency because they receive that regardless if they do anything for the community. And then they have to participate in meetings, and that's what the paper trail follows. And that would be at the chapter level, which it might work, but it goes back to the settlement. The settlement said that you can't administer these funds at the chapter level without it being a form of compensation that is taxable. So in the past, there was stipends given, they weren't taxed, and then there was also payments that are given that were taxed. And that's sort of where it was rectified. So the questions of whether DNR, I think in our case, ag, we would be for any changes, but it would also have to change the plan operation, also the funding, annual funding, and it really has to look at supervision because again, is it going to be are they going to be supervised by the agency or the chapter president or coordinator, or are they going to be supervised by the department manager or the executive director in ways of I guess would be administering these funds. Currently, the Department of Ag, my fiduciary responsibility through staff is to verify whether these funds are being administered according to code. So that's sort of the primary role. And yes, the binoculars of that is that, it does take time. And as we make a change here, there's probably some other things that need to be looked at. Maybe it needs to have some form of a study or something to do a comparison. A few years ago, there was a comparison that looked at the full-time employment and how that can better serve Navajo and also those people in those positions that are performing those services. That may be something that could be brought up. But annually, and I guess to answer your question, there was a memorandum, and this has come up years and years before. The quickest way was do a memorandum understanding where the chapter would administer the funds and essentially would still be appropriate through agriculture. But since we're at the front end of a fiscal cycle, possibly we could look at amending where we're aligned how we administer the funds, because our only role of the Department of Agriculture is administering these funds with the officials. They have, and they take an oath of office on their own responsibilities. It is administrative, but it doesn't link them to the fund. The fund is only for meetings and basically showing up and voting. So, Mr. Chair, in reference to the other things mentioned, hopefully I answered whether we are for a more proficient system, and if it's at the chapter level, in which we've been working with in the past, and also moving in the future. I think that we do have 4 employees, and in terms of what the capacity of community development has, they obviously have more employees. They handle more staff that are in a similar situation, but they're FTEs. Maybe they may have a better chance of administering these funds and be more proficient. And the other question would be, the impacts of the transfer. I think I kind of indicated a little bit of that. I think the positive impact would be they could turn their information in at the agency or the local chapter, but if they're still linked to an annual or biweekly payroll, it still goes back up to Window and they still would have to wait for their check. The perception that the elected officials have, it goes back several years where they turn in, information, or they attend the meeting, they get paid by the end of the meeting or within the day. So that would not happen, because of the IRS settlement. And then the other impact that is positive, well, not say negative or positive, the other impact would just be that the officials would have to maybe, we have to consider what their responsibilities are, and also maybe look at amending some of the responsibilities for the compensation. The compensation has always been a point of contention. What is their actual duties versus what they assume they are and what they actually are, Mr. Chair. So hopefully I kind of sort of answered the historical. I just wanted to indicate they were never appropriated, but there was a memorandum agreement that the two divisions had, and it worked for some years until the IRS said it has to be all in one payroll. So that if we can figure out how to make one payroll and it could be the local chapter, it might be sufficient, but it still be the same mechanism, but just be one layer more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman. Honorable members of RDC, any comments or questions for Mr. Watchman?
Chairman.
Honorable Vice Chair Walker, go ahead.
Okay, so Chairman, committee members, at some point I'd like one of the grazing officials to speak to the issue, because sometimes you could see it different from the people that are affected themselves. They may have recommendations or even solutions. And that would be Leslie Williams. Thank you.
I believe we'll do that. I would like to hear from a grazing official. So the grazing official has been identified. So we'll give him some time so they can provide us their perspective. Mr. Leslie Williams, you have the floor, sir.
Okay. Na kodo. Di pahuin niki oya on kachin na hadno. Benina niki Ila cannot be in a chapter day with any kind. I do not answer non-citizens, or we go in reverse fashion. But that the never seen or they had never not had or they never skipped ego of his what us or this nonsense. Nature all that or less at any key. All not on Tanti Carnahan. That's because some people are not an agreement on the stipend system. Personally, I don't have a problem with Department of Agriculture. They advocate for our budget every year. Is the chapter going to do that for us? I highly doubt that. Has undergo chapters. Out has aniki certification, non-certified. That sanction dalia. Asian that our grazing officials they have to pada negro. Was it an earlier that no yata poison sample. Although my chapter at Talani Lake, we don't have a coordinator. We don't have an AMS PEP day, yeah, part-time with none of the niche. Call la ida, I have been agenda has illa. And in now it's only kind of illa. For IRS findings, HE8 IRS units in the key has on it, federal regulations, not federal laws, wages that be taxable. Nikki, I don't able to issue it on all the wages. There's no way around that. A call for other, are we considered employees just for tax purposes only? Those are some of the questions that we really need to pose and look at. Raising committee members, Nikki, Obe Onke Ohun Khan Here Nedo need leader, Nishidot Nani, Glenshidot Nani, Nihalo, Nahajo Paiki, Nahajo Pai Halo. A call on which there's in Hatchan, but I need none, Edo Tadako. I shall go on class and attack a under just go coincident, but that you need it. Ella on Haban to that kiss a yacht, Edo, is a call. And you're crazy officials, though we were not the ones that made that mistake. You know, that upper level, these findings, Nikki. A call adult certification, Nikki. There's 65 chapters that are not certified. That's more than half. Why do we even try to entertain something of this magnitude? So that you are certified, that would be NASA. Oh, not but the 100 or the Nikki, so we stayed. Call Passion to go, my so stipends about the one. A joe out of legend, ego, a joe your hunty, nisbo. Out of it, ego, what ego, Department of Ag, and they nisbo out at that. That she absent the host. Other technology, and then it really Mr. Walker does see a hot seat. We can scan these documents. We can email them in. That would eliminate the mileage. What order on our case? The chapter which is anti-critical. Raising regulations. Naniki, those standard of operating procedures dependent on the clinici, Bened Nishiki. Is she going to eat all this? Chapter is on the sheet of the on the chapter. Just a chapter officials, though, they all live in town. Independent has tea. For a chapter, not about it, not just the call the 16th. Go long go see about it ain't raising committee members. She's a hot oil to that case. So, only our chapter. So, this is Lands, I got skin how many it's go up. The note doesn't and Nikki thinks so hello. Of course, the crabs as the Nikki credit of the artist. And so the Kodo Bahono Sendole. Department of Ag don't know the contestants and so one that case. Out of the email is other quarter. Where's the card either, but you know they're always out there. Don't have a problem with them. BIA, not that. So there's just that working relationship. You as an individual, as a Christian, so you need to establish those. For it is about it, then the should be out of 11 chapters. The place of that, thank you.
Mr. Williams, Aro Bahain, Seki, Aro Saspanana, City, the Bemnant, Arno Seneki.
Oh, yeah, it's Kenny Johnson. Then I'll today.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Always inside, and what Mr. Leslie Williams stated is true. Should Obama this case, Mr. Walker, yeah, the technology. I call Obama this case ago. Why can't we just use the facts? Why is the Department of Ag, maybe not the Department of Ag, maybe it's the accounts payable that's asking for I don't need the document the key. I don't bear yagi neko. To eliminate going to Wonder Rock, why can't we just fax it in to the Department of Ag? If we attend the meeting, why can't the chapter official sign off on it, put their stamp on it, saying that this individual was here attending the meeting? Claim form, we don't have to turn them in. I mean, in person, we can eliminate that and then just have the chapter official president or the coordinator stamp it, then we can just fax it in. And that way, Department of Ag can accept it. They can sign off on it and send it to the payroll. Technology there, I think that will eliminate a lot of things instead of changing everything. It's going to take a long time. The DOJ is involved, so that's going to take a long time. It might even mess up our payroll. We might not get paid for so long while they're doing all this, and you could this case, also, I recommend to the accounts payable and to the Department of Ag. Although stipend in person go, or faxes ain't all scanned out net or I let the Department of Ag. They can accept it, sign off on it with a chapter approval saying that this person was here. Some kind of verification saying that we actually attend the meeting. Could you get sign sheet between 9 and meeting agenda between 9 just the claim form it has to be original to get that me. I don't want to stand 2 months. She was done. I don't understand me. All June and July and the end because you can understand the only been branding, branding season. Or Tony can understand. Oh, you we don't have time to go to Wonder Rock and take care of our payroll. If we can do it from the chapter, we'll get paid. No problem. What's wrong with that? I'm totally catching cat.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, Aro, Pachinzigi, So, Mr. Williams, Anosa, the Bevenant, Anoson, are chapter of Ada, Nihanish Inosa, Nigi, Shehe, Shehedla, a core. Dishin Kro on a big age, Kyoshin hate out 8 nails Kro, Baha Zigi. So, Kare Honey Beshman, An Kro, Panahidesh are Anbo Bigay. Anbo Bigay. Press *6. Ms. Begay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Chair. I think he got off the call or his call got knocked off.
Chairman, Kealan.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Begay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm driving into Winter Rock. Usually there's no signal between the Summit and Kintetry. But I'll probably be dropped off anyway. Well, so I put the head though in the I mean, I think that really kind of, I guess, time for me to back off on it. Because the only reason why that I would push this is because 2 years ago, and this was that's the chairman that was asking why. I mean,
Hey, you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
Honorable Begay. Honorable Begay.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Delegate Freeland, I'm on the call. Thank you.
Hey, Delegate Honorable Freeland, thank you for getting on the call. Yeah, we're having a discussion on the chapter grazing official stipends to be transferred to the local chapters from one program to another. We have had two grazing officials that spoke to the issue, and we're still having some discussions on this, Honorable Freeland. So currently, Honorable Begay was speaking until he got cut off, so I believe that he'll probably call back in. Honorable Begay? We'll give him time when he calls back in. He was headed into Window Rock, so we'll call on him when he gets back on the call. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any comments or questions? Naidos Kiddush.
Chair, I have a comment again. Question.
Go ahead, Honorable Stewart.
Okay, trying to put my earpiece in. But my question would be to Mr. Watchman, I guess, more or less, and the fact that I would like to know, Shajah made a good point, going towards the modern, I guess you want to say modern type of communication now with the technology the way it is, and knowing that some schools and even some businesses do electronic signature. Also, this goes to DOJ too, is how can we get the nation to move towards electronic signatures? Because as a school board member, I do that. I do electronic signatures on the payroll for the staff and the budgets that we review. We're allowed to do electronic transfers. I mean, not transfers, signatures. So when we do those signatures, then it's still allowed. So for the past year under the pandemic, we haven't been in to sign any documents. So with this pandemic happening, has that been a consideration from the Department of Ag for the grazing officials, since they're saying that they have to travel in, and how can we move that progress along? That's the first part to my question. The second part is that Shania stated that he wanted to see what can be done by this budget year. I don't know if it can be done by this budget year. I mean, it looks like it's going to be a process to where we're going to have to educate the chapter staff, the grazing officials, on what needs to be submitted. Because we, just like you have stated, Shania, there's a wide range of individuals out there in these positions that have different various educational levels. So some will grasp it easily, some won't. And we don't want to slow up that process again either. Right now, they're used to this process. So how can we, again, like Shajah said, how can we streamline it? But if it's gonna be not done within the next month and a half, I mean, look at what we're doing with the agricultural funding. We've been going back and forth with that one, and that we still have chapters now asking where that's at. That's not even, I don't know where that is, honestly. we've been asking, but there's no report on that one to say that it's ready, and the chapters need to submit some documents within the legislation, because it took controller how long to establish those accounts within the chapter too. That's the other side of it. For now, those are my thoughts on this, Shinar, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to Mr. Watchman. Mr. Watchman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the question from Delegate Stewart. Yes, we have explored how to simplify, and I think the pandemic probably brought up some avenues, but then again, the Department of Ag could determine and say this would be best way to be, I guess, streamlined, but there's other entities involved, and I think one thing that we probably need to have happen, maybe the committee needs to get involved and place some directives that we get all of the entities involved that administer these stipends and see how we can come up, because I could arbitrarily say, go ahead and fax it in, but then payroll won't accept that, or I could arbitrarily tell that, one of the officials that you can go ahead and, do something, but it really doesn't come down to my decision. It really comes down to payroll, also accounts payable, the controller's office, other entities outside of my control. So again, there's some good ideas, and no disrespect to the recipients. They have some solutions, and they expressed in the past to us, and what we probably need to maybe bring those entities together. I know you do have a number of people on the call, or entities or programs on the call. I think it needs to go down further to the actual individuals that process these daily, and see how that can be more proficient, and also look at ways of electronically. We did abbreviate some of the requirements during the pandemic. I think we went back to them more recently, Mr. Chair. The second question, and regarding the funding, I believe community development, they're still in the process of getting those monies out there. The Department of Ag made the funds available through our Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, and we have been assisting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman. Honorable Stewart, do you have a follow-up question?
No, but I think if we can just look into the electronic part of it, I think that would be good to follow up on that section. Thank you.
Okay, let me also go to the Department of Justice, Mr. Mel Rodas. Your response on the electronic signatures.
Mr. Chair, this is Mel Rodas. Thank you for the question, Honorable Stewart. I'll have to look into whether the requirement for original signatures is an OOC policy or whether it's just an internal procedure. The policies for OOC were adopted by the Budget and Finance Committee, and they can be amended by the Budget and Finance Committee. If it's merely an internal OOC procedure, that's something that Controller Begay could change at her discretion and in writing, probably through a memo. So I can look into that, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Willie, are you still on the call, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm still here.
Okay. Could you also opine on having the electronic copies where you're all asking for originals? Is that just part of the law? And can they submit like copies first and then submit the originals later, Mr. Willie?
That's what they said before.
As far as the stipend payments, I'll have to check on that. I know that during the pandemic we were accepting electronic copies. with the signatures and everything on them. But since some of the things have been uplifted, I'll have to verify with accounts payable. But as far as going electronic, I do believe that we did try a few years back to make this electronic. Some of the roadblocks that we encountered was emails. Some of the agency satellite offices didn't have enough, I guess, Wi-Fi band to send some of the documents. But it has been tried. We can try it again. I know that I believe it was Roxy June from Agriculture was helping assist to make sure that some of these were getting processed. I think emails were another problem. The other issue was some of the individuals didn't want to go on ACH. They actually wanted a paper check. So those opportunities are out there. We can do it electronic. It's just a matter of getting everybody to buy into that process also. So, but I do agree that the electronic versions would be a lot more efficient. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll follow up with the accounts payables on your specific question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
We would certainly appreciate that, Mr. Woolley. That would be very helpful for our grazing officials if that can be done as far as having them submit electronic copies. So, and currently with the numbers rising, I believe we're still in the pandemic as well, because today is the beginning of the orange status where 15 people can mate and still follow the safety guidelines. Shananta, Honorable Kialam Begay, are you on the call, sir?
Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. What I was saying, Shananta, I don't know, Chairman, stop me if I'm not going in the right direction of posing this comment or statement to the elected official, grazing official. Okay? But my question is that what is the position by the grazing official? The reason why I say this is that 2 years ago, at each agency level, this was one of the recommendations that was given to the RDC. Chapter has ordered, but the yard and Deniki administration had all at the aping each other. And then the second one that I wanted to push was establishing the agency office, grazing office at each of the agency. Now, even though I just heard from two local officials, grazing officials, that so that's is that something that is not worthwhile to do on behalf of the grazing official of it ish? Case. And the reason why I say this, Chairman, the reason why I say this is that during the last term, a veterans organization wanted to make some changes on the Veteran Advisory Commission status as a commission, rather than being an advisory to a commission. No, Veterans Diego, the council passed it, but the president vetoed it just because one veterans organization lobbied the president to veto it. Case that we push it, then the president may veto it. If some grazing officials are saying that, well, we don't have a problem with it, we hit the door. Chairman, I guess we need to get a straight answer from our local grazing official. What position and what is it that they really want us to do in working on behalf of them on this particular situation that we're dealing with? Maybe what is the overall? Maybe get a response directly from each of the agency grazing official chair, from 5 of them. As a whole, as an individual, so do they speak on behalf of the remainder grazing official? So now that you've opened the mic that's on to the grazing official, maybe allow. I'd like to hear directly, maybe some more of the grazing official, what their main concern is, and is it that we can just do this? Do we do it? Continue doing it or not? Up in the shaped up in the at the not need or don't John Dolly. A cocoa and ship but a cup with a yash that could a lap in ha, ye did stop in happy had the hanky yego. None I did no other could the resolutions that I can data other chapter your delegate in response and the lobby at that order. Ban is that should I lead it up or see that no other that is stock response and then Jenny a whole net that one saw that store then could hit all the chapter. I mean grazing officials then by is not on the chairman. Now going back to Mr. Watman's response, supervision, I do have, I guess, a concern, a problem with that because the one thing I'm not really sure how the grazing official perceives as elected official being supervised by non-elected official. That's one area I see that needs to be resolved. And then the other thing, the chapter we went through a situation earlier during the summer session, Chairman, because during the we asked to establish emergency.
Honorable Begay.
Due to exposure, 1 week that's it. Close it. Now that tells me that they're also in the same situation. That probably tells me that any progress of any work on behalf of the grazing official stops for that whole week. So maybe let's just approve the budget as is right now and then go back and try to resolve how do we maybe policy they could all transferring the funding to the chapter. I mean that was the simplest. I would have think that it was a simple to do just so that the chapter official, the grazing official, be receiving their stipend at the chapter level. Nothing more. I mean, the work still continues. The everything that they're required to do continues. It's just a matter of getting the check right away. Either there's availability about direct deposit. So all of that, I guess those needs to be now that a majority. I don't know how many grazing officials. Maybe do a head count.
Honorable Begay. Honorable Begay. Honorable Keel and Begay.
Chair, this is Mr. Tahi. His phone got disconnected again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tahi, for that. Ro Naida Kidnla. Ado Mr. Rod Begay. There was a question that was asked by one of the grazing officials, and that question was, what about the chapters that are sanctioned, will they be able to assist grazing officials with their stipends, Mr. Begay?
I actually would defer to the Office of the Auditor General on that question. I think it depends on the corrective action plan is my thinking, but I would like the Auditor General to weigh in on that.
Thank you, Mr. Begay, for that. I don't believe that we have the Auditor General on the call with us. But
Chairman Kellen's back online again.
Okay, Honorable Begay, go ahead. You may proceed.
I'm sorry, Chairman. It's one of those days where I need to get into Window Rock. So even though I'm right in front of the council chamber right now, that the phone just went off. Anyway, I guess that's indeed asko kudo grazing officials khalit all at IC job kitten no kha but the job kitten is I'm sure to cut that from that obviously Mr. The Division of Natural Resource will tell the president, well, the grazing officials are you kitten zida you don't I mean that's a given. That they'll probably indicate to the president that what the council did on this grazing official stipend, everyone's not in tune with it. Or maybe veto that. I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm anticipating. So then now go that job which that chapter in grazing officials especially establishing the district grazing office. And then other increase of the supplies equipment that hagi basis and hundred job that ego but he can't ego bendit hate bendit what don't need even now I hot heat hallen about the case and then one of my colleagues is saying that the chapter yet they don't have they may not be a full support by the RDC a chairman. Maybe I take a step back and let maybe some type of a written statement given to us by each of the grazing official by agency. But again, it has to be supported by the administration. So otherwise, I know the council. The job is Casey Jingun that the vote to get the job is Casey Jingun to go. There's an easy action by the president on these activities that the council does. If it's a majority, supermajority rules, I mean, vote obviously there's a bigger consideration by the president of what he needs to do. So anyway, I'm just thinking at the level of Window Rock now. But again, I need some clear response or position by our grazing official at the chapter level. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Honorable Begay. We had two grazing officials, Kurohaji Asa. One statement that was made was, "Ila ayo onde nanila." This is the reason why we left in the first place. Now we're going back to the chapters. IRS I personally don't have a problem with the Department of Agriculture, Nila. And he raised the question, is the chapter going to advocate for us like the Department of Agriculture advocates for us, Nila? Ako nation ashin yobadat is asatida ne nan adan lenigi grazing official Sabasada Kola. They work well with the Department of Agriculture. Adosagi should Ahotaban Siskation what end accounts payable gigi originals they okay to get and they let your quaggy bahun and streamline it all Nathan no kodo. Vice Chair Walker Yaha Jigi. I believe that's where we need to focus on Shananda is to streamline because the Office of the Controller, Mr. Willie, just said that we were accepting electronic copies during the pandemic. Nah? Currently, we're in the orange status of the pandemic. So we're still in the pandemic. With that being said, Shananda, I truly believe that we probably need to just look at streamlining for our grazing officials and also like Honorable Begay stated, Roya Hatzi Nehinanta Aro Ara Daisnos Anget Bemant Ano Siniki at 5 agencies, do land board, sto Yen del Tal Goshin Stopiga. Dion has streamlined a dash, article 8 on and at a no hard zig or change the big at all hot out. Start betan hadit. If they can approve a resolution from their agency grazing to say that Kodo start betan hadit, I have a ladit, place their own has streamlined or say electronic copies again. Akon habe il neho bekehon is lado let adana bekene originals again combachel don't know the hard zik or shinto yat eho atchego don hunt ago don still go betchen papa hunt it or let a koi betchen as la ya but the house bananas is or let a kokoro ayushit ano hard zishin and like a halando Halet Ayades is dik a Korohat an Hitcher or Z, the Babanant Anela, the Koro I see Babandish Mission Sunday, are they Ayota hit the Shah Nela? We need an answer from the grazing officials, Ninigi Nina from the 5 agencies. Sagi Layades is in the Tati supervision hat Nigi do Adnago Bahna the kid Halet Ela Quagi. Elected official and the grazing official. Ako ache that do elected official and legal supervisor but on lachit sto arosate sto chapters done that el kashibenina halet ai hanal sosish panasno that let or as a chapter dana that eskalo che arbes nada as sindole. Bahona za go chapters de bes nas nego that eskalgo. Yahana the Incendolet, I don't the Department of Agriculture, Danko, Ahut Edon, de Natan Zendolet. A Koti, Quagis kitchen and Ado, Arabish, the Babnant, Ano, Senegin, Hinanish, Enegin, Heg, Sekoro, Wait all on hot eat, needs, and the Giba Yale, so. What are not Kigon Hitcher Hatzi, Aro the Babnant, Ano Senegi. So that would be a request from the Oversight Committee, Resources and Development Committee, from 5 agencies, grazing official, not Senegi, that is not Anshin, resolution Hatadof, Ahdo, Qui, what are Ben seats, that don't need at Osne, and the big Eho E Hakodo. We can fix this. We can amend laws to make it to where it's feasible for grazing officials to receive their stipends. Leadership meeting. Honorable members of RDC. So I go DCD then, but it also hit iron sick case to let Dr. Yellowman debayel tiki.
Yeah, hey. That's a bizarre dos Asia. That is an assistant reader, this Cheney out of Rock Point chapter, Northern Agency.
Oh, okay. Northern Agency, Roshin Kro Data, the Bebnant and Lenigi Barret or Osh Reader Dish Cheatney, the very chance others, Mr. Dish Cheatney, you have the floor of the sort of NH Hansi.
Thank you, Chair. Got oh. Hey, the Navede Kunakia had three I don't other, but the Hashnet, Ginan, some of those. RDC Ajahan Sosin and get his son in the Holges. A bias, Kissons out, oh, I read it any kind of short, the Ashen Big on this in long. A Ajan could oh, Navede could Atan in the Stone Age, the so Holges. A declared Department of Ag has under Ado National, so it's in taking away payroll, accountable. Joe Quaggy in the Department of Ag, they're okay, but at the payroll, did they want these original, especially the claim forms. A Quaggy Bego, Azus Aneja. So I don't put a meeting that we have our agenda, and then the minutes and signing sheet, everything, just claim forms. So we go back and forth. We have these meetings like planning chapter meeting, that auto permittee meetings, auto districts or agency meeting. So sometimes it's 2 weeks apart. Our meeting schedule are different, so we had to run back and forth 2 times. But it's not so cool. The technology that we're in it, electrical signature to Niniki. Although here that all the quite a hot sago. A codot on all source, a email. Some of these are reports, agenda, signing sheet. Same thing with this planning and chapter meeting. I just what I don't get the agenda. And then the signing sheet. They don't put on it. And so we don't have any problem with it. From our position as a grading official, Kodonal source, he needs I don't know Adiyaki. I don't know to take it quick. The Department of Ag are doing pretty good with us, but the process lanes and idea the audit it original done no, so that's where we're at with it. I don't cause the direct deposit and we're doing okay too. They at the office there. That they do your get on I don't check it. One person can get out there and bring those checks to this location. No, I don't can't no says. Are they electronic? What I bet or that initial note I handwritten that and that report stuff. I would answer this and then so. Oh, I could go could I be nailed the story. I could egg it so that's where we're at with I don't question cut or was done not been hahen get on could the chapter go other these chapters that with Northern, some of these grading officials are saying that their chapter officials aren't working with it because we're under 2 different titles. Code Yiki Aja chapter Asati and Sidokos Asati. Ako Aja chapter 10 Netani Aja Code A Benasness Aja. Get Tagaton Hanasness at his nail, but I know that the Hadnet. We don't get assistance from some of these chapters that know what because they had has says so. A cocoa dick are not chapter banded or I say that it doesn't end, but as of now, I could afford just to go. I knew could have a consta a year ago and has tips and chapter. I don't know even and con ha. Consta ya had it. I got that. So Hazo correctly this process energy time forms. The electronic signature. It'll be nice to get all these paperwork with emails or send them as fax. I don't know. I don't could spend the equipment. Some chapters had purchased some of these for us. Nana it on the way what happened they don't quit echo. But out there, this got it. Need echo. This twison, but now it's shot. And then you get hold of. I think about it. I shall bet it's it. I just can't say caution. They bet it's it. No, a count. So what end hit on me? So are you thought nothing needs a link? Stoti. I got that. Don't hit now. At on Hazo, a kitchen in the store, as elected official. I got that and hit on it during orientation. I got that also been has it and I don't have so. Do great ideas because ethics and rules. Do what onions and that streets of Kato to Kate and lead it. So these things, what that ego could they never say now. But I do the Department of Everything get extension and then they get on zone of business. Oh, I don't put echo. I never did to the adequate edit and non deal. J. Not echo. So we're doing okay, sir. But these other chapters, of course, it's at those and stuff. It's in your done so. Hey, I understand. Oh, you go back this. I thought the nipping in Nashi. Thank you for having this time. I was saying that.
Mr. Deschini, did you say we get direct deposit? Collect out and net direct deposit.
Oh, we get our direct deposit with our account. The Department of Ag with with information with our banking routing numbers and lineage. It could all claim it turn in it. I don't live in how process it is accountable. I don't that they go to direct deposit from there for us. That what I need is less. But claim it's not quite by years. Going back and forth to get these claims in. They take what
Mr. Watchman.
Thank you.
Mr. Watchman, how many of our grazing officials do get direct deposit?
Mr. Chair, I would say at least over 90% of them, if not all. I think we're moving towards all, but I think that's been during the pandemic, or I guess we're still in the pandemic. There really there's very limited paper checks. It was only during the time when they were newly elected for that 2-week period. But I would say more than 90%, if not 99%, receive electronic payment.
So you do pay them direct deposit, almost every one of them, Mr. Watchman?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think where the bottleneck is the information that goes in to making that payment. That's what the stipend claims, the claim sheet that goes in, or the minutes, those type of things, or the agenda. That's what is the claim itself. The form itself has to be the original. That's where the bottleneck begins. And during the high time of the pandemic, there was a relax of that, and we were able to receive this either electronic or fax document. So we then didn't require for the official to physically bring those in from wherever location they're at, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that, Mr. Watchman. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any other questions or comments? If not, let me go to Dr. Yellowman. Press *6, Dr. Yellowman.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. I have quite a few notes here, but they may have changed in listening to the conversation. I'll still follow my notes, but some of the topics have been somewhat brought up or maybe even answered. but just in no particular order, I do have quite a few notes. I think I have close to, I don't know, 20 bullet points here. So there was some mention. So good afternoon, honorable members of RDC and grazing officials, Yate, and then to the staff on the line, thank you, and to other members of the council, Delegate Crotty, Yate. So I'll just go through some notes here. So it was mentioned that back in 2014 that council did give the chapters that authority to process the checks or process that information. And to my understanding, and this kind of goes back to Delegate Kialan Begay's notion that it would just be a handoff to the chapters. I think there might be some complexities that need to be addressed, and I want to do that. I also have some recommendations pertaining to the conversation, but also some that lead to just the administrative concerns or the administrative functions, maybe for DNR. But in 2014, the chapters were requiring written and verbal reports from grazing officials. And to my understanding, there was some challenges or maybe also some connection to those audit reports. And part of those reporting requests lead back to how the grazing officials and the farm boards do operate under Title III as opposed to the chapters. And maybe this is already common knowledge, but the chapter officials do operate under Title 26. So the process is similar to Payne, but also there's some differences. It does go back to if changes are made to DCD, these would have to be reviewed and possibly amended if necessary. I think that's where I would lean on our chapter unit for additional information. I think also during that time of the audit, the OAG did find or report on the audit a form of double dipping, and that double dipping is an easy general term, but the complexity is that for certified and non-certified, the difference is the chapters would have to follow their FMS policy. And if it were to go back to the chapters would then have to amend or make changes to their financial policies. I think that could be complex or time consuming, so to speak. There would have to be some changes there. But the double dipping was related to how some of the reports were made or generated, and to which fund or accounts that those reports were being with. When those reports were submitted, the double dipping came from which accounts were paid to the grazing officials. And also there was recommendation from ASC and SPPS staff that there would have to be maybe perhaps some review of the BIM and funding allocation and distribution. So again, back to Delegate Kialan, is that you wouldn't be changing much. I think there's more complexities to that. And I think a review of the BIM would have to be at least somewhat reviewed. Other concerns are that this was brought up by our staff, ASC and SPPS, but there are some concerns on the payments and chapter boundaries. I do understand that some of the grazing officials oversee multiple chapters, and a concern was brought up about a review of a legal map and boundaries to be reviewed and addressed. These may be more recommendations, but my point is it could be more complex than it was mentioned before. I also have in my notes that another area that would need to be reviewed are how the grazing officials are already incorporated into the land use planning, which is which may interfere or maybe need to be reviewed if the chapters are to assume those responsibilities of payments and how the land use meetings are calculated or reported upon. So I want to add that. I also have some comments on sanctioned chapters and the process. Currently, as it stands, or the current processes, chapters begin with a review from the Auditor General's office that then leads to the chapters having to implement the corrective action plan. When the chapters are not fully complying with the corrective action plan, that's when the sanction is imposed. These directly impact some of the functions at the chapters or the payment process. I think that would need to be addressed as well. Then kind of moving on, I may come back to the sanctioned chapters, but I did take some notes. I'll follow up on some questions with Mr. Rodriguez on some of the processes for the certified LGA chapters. And that was a little bit new to me on the settlement and the certified chapters having to learn how to deduct on some of these W-9 and W-2 forms. But also, I think for me and DCD, our homework is really to look at why and how there's such major differences with the grazing officials operating under Title III and then the chapter officials operating under Title 26. I think the homework for us is how we can address where there's some conflict at the chapter level, and how we can facilitate the chapter officials working closely with the grazing officials. There seems to be more communication needed there, and that's something I think I will look into a little bit more. My other notes are, if I may, Chair, these seem to be internal administrative concerns or internal administrative functions. My comment may be to my colleague, Dr. Shabal, as to why DNR would not propose, why can't they propose a plan to improve their system rather than considering the transfer. I don't, that kind of is interesting to me, but I'm a little bit taken back as to the last comment made by Mr. Watchman that close to 90% of them do receive the direct payment. That might have been something helpful to know at the very opening. I say this because I think at some point in defending DCD to an extent, we're overwhelmed, and this is in no disrespect to the grazing officials, and that's why I mentioned understanding how to learn more about facilitating a better conversation between the chapter officials and the grazing officials. We'll do our part in doing that, but internally between DCD and DNR, this is not our first conversation about DNR and DCD addressing issues at the chapter level. I would recommend that DNR be a little bit more forthcoming in some of these responsibilities to elected officials and to all customers, so to speak. And those customers are the Navajo people. And so those would be some strong recommendations. The other is, I do know that there are and have been questions about advancing the Navajo Nation's government to better use of technology. I believe some of those conversations are happening at the Division of General Services and HR on moving forward with electronic signature, being that we experienced what we experienced last year with the pandemic and COVID, but more so just omitting or omitting less travel or having individuals having to travel from Western Agency in various parts of the nation to Window for some of these signatures. So I do know that there have been conversations on trying to address that and incorporate better use of technology.
We're down. Payment. Okay.
My last concern is, this is more of a timing concern, but I do have memos here from Delegate Kialan Begay dating January 12th, May 5th, February 16th to DNR, and one of them does state that that there were numerous leadership meetings with local officials, but on this call it sounded like we needed to hear more from local officials. I just think sometimes, you know, again, additional recommendation to DNR, we need to work better. So, Chair, those are my concerns from DCD, and I think there's a lot that DCD and the chapters need to continue working on, but again, if there's ways to improve things, we're always here to make those improvements or at the very least adjust them. So those would be my comments for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yellman, for the recommendations and your statement with double dipping as well as conflicts and working well together with chapter officials at the local level. So, honorable members of RDC, do you have any other comments or questions? Bosch, I believe that we covered everything. We've come to understand that our grazing officials are receiving direct deposit at approximately 90% of them lying at the local level. So, Koro by Papa Yale Kiki, she unlay agency, then go hit out a resolution in Hitchin, yet Nesne go hot up on C case. Digi electronic copy gi Adani and Ajigo ha Bohnet Zanchidan no Kro Talt Ego Corona Yen Hitchin Hadastito I ta a hot arbich as Lala direct deposit. Of course, such a go ha. Ayo to Danes and the chapter J. I could go at a Department of Agriculture J. Bishandale Nishano Hadasti Sadat what out at Ian Sada case Walla hot end hot hour talt in hitching our position and not Seniki a crow van cheek case go by Yale go ni digi a how streamline nenegit a focus earlier go on and ago papa hunt your door niche what a go a control because Mr. Willie so ya hard did pandemic ibin na ha the electronic copies ge accepted in that nila jot ati ha kon hit khanana sne ben in nachin koshin khand hot nasko electronic copies be submit in the shin abiga akwaran hinan ayo order and hit the shakhan de tiki at a budget gate or yet of Bohnet Zadan had not out in Nako. No chapter the bitch as Lado Lasigi, near the Babnant Adan Leniki, Akonde. I guess 5 agencies then for resolution and negotiate about the Sati later Bigashan and are not any. So these are my recommendations and we could have a follow-up with the executive officers of 5 agencies either the don't need. But Asian and I saw Spahanana, the members of RDC.
I have a comment tonight.
Honorable Stewart. Go ahead.
Biga. We have new information now. From both sides, from all 3 sides, the division directors, the supervisors, DOJ, and Mr. Bigay, for the chapters, on the Hitrigo, and we heard that, it's from the bottleneck is within the finance department. Okay. I know at one time it was either Mr. Rodas or Mr. Willie that stated that these can be changed through the BIM as well as the policies. So maybe we need to sit down with budget and finance as RDC, Shania, to ask for them what their considerations are as budget and finance committee to move the divisions and the departments towards electronic filing, because one of the attorneys said they were going to look into it more. What are the possibilities? Where is it written? And we are policymakers, so we can amend those policies to say that in this day and age now, due to the pandemic, because these policies were written when we weren't even in a pandemic. But because of this pandemic now, we have taken it upon ourselves to amend legislations to where in any crisis, in any situation like this again, in the future, that the council and the divisions and the departments will rely on the electronic signature process, which will probably change by then. But, for now, I think that's what we need to look at, because right now they're asking for hard copies. And even for us as delegates, when we do our documents, I know for myself, I submit a lot of my stuff through electronic emails, sign-in sheets and things like that, even though I live there less than 30 minutes away, but, I still do it like that just to make sure that, I have my stuff and that's my backup. When I go to meetings, that's why we carry as less as we can, because we try to keep our paperwork in line as well. So I think maybe we can look at those with budget and finance, Shania, as well, to see what we can do with them and help them amend some policies with these signature processes. That's just a comment I want to make, Shania. Thank you.
Honorable Chair Crotty, are you still on the call with us?
Yes, this is Delegate Crotty. Yes, I'm on the call.
Okay, did you hear Honorable Stewart's recommendation as far as budget and finance, perhaps getting involved with this?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stewart, for the recommendation. We are planning to have a meeting tomorrow, and I can bring this back to the committee on some of the recommendations, and hopefully we can have a joint session regarding this issue and the recommendations from the committee in streamlining the process and how to modernize the forms, but still keep that legal or that integrity of the forms to reduce any type of, fraudulent activity. So thank you, Chair. I think in this day and age, we should have that technology, and I appreciate the recommendation.
Thank you, Honorable Crowdy. Certainly appreciate that. Biga installation and the electronic copies hanenigi. Hashboba hash eliago eha robe on installation. So, honorable members of RDC, do you have any other comments or questions?
Chairman Kellen.
Honorable Begay, go ahead.
Chairman, just so that the local grazing official don't think that we just took everything back what we wanted to do for their involvement. Again, maybe this could all I don't know if we have it or not. The journals when we met with the grazing official. I mean, that's my justification of what I've been doing. I'm not saying that the RDC members are voting it, but all I'm saying is that this my justification of what I'm doing. I don't know, maybe they're the individuals that were not at these agency meetings or grazing official, that's another question. This is the overall system. Again, I can guarantee that our grading official will just get lost in the system of this process again. Yes, they may get the funding quickly of what they're doing. The factor of what we're trying to establish is what we were trying to do. So the bottleneck area, but yet, grading officials and well, maybe some. I mean, some areas have more grazing permits than others, and some may are having good relationship. And that's a question I may ask Mr. Watchman. I mean, maybe tell us which area of the chapter that you have difficult having a communication or a relationship. Just I don't know how to attention and then that tells me that maybe that area is being comparing to my area. That's the chapter meetings and so on. I don't Sahoshi that's at Niego, Nanishin Viniki, Quacket, Bahajort, it is Nisiki Yalban, I think maybe that will be the focus that we need to do through this budget. Because several $billion the cost opera funding. The chapter has that they'll be the first say yes or no in communicating with the local community members to start anything. Line up that the things that the nigga but yet they need to and that's what happened to a lot of these chapters based on they couldn't meet a lot of these deadlines. They couldn't meet a lot of these requirements that a lot of these grading officials had to do just because they had limited funding, just because they had limited resource, and just because that they have a lot of things that they were doing on behalf of the central government. The Ecuador, the Bernard Sosika, that is ain't Yunanish baby, Willia, a Coquade, and Shade, or Ned Sanshiti, other the Ada, Goshinkuga, the Hassango Kodo, whatever they have, what are ye, they niche got out. Maybe some areas, these economic development, that these progress one that Aki, that out of these from my area, the initiative, quacky, you, the Nanashita Yosin. And then the majority of them is that the water line, the power line, the broadband, cell tower, housing, veterans, or that ego, Kodonan, Shiniki Babiche, Bitnil Argo, Quackade, Stipend, Nikit Aya, Koshipich, Hoti, he added Ocean Quacky, Nadnishla. And that's why I kept saying that, okay, how much resource do they have? How much funding do they have to get what they need to do at the local chapter? If the grazing official says that, well, yes, we're sufficient, we have enough resource, we get sufficient help, then I can focus on another area, another program that's willing and wants our help to get what they need and what they want. And they nishiki no I dance that's I keep in Nago. We know that fish and wildlife, the rangers, that Agi Aja, I know that they need a lot of money. So Aja go that focus at the that's a Bohanet Zon so on first case but nonetheless, but I need some assurance from each of the chapter. I mean, not each chapter, from each of the agency grazing officials, maybe as a chair, in meeting with all of your grazing officials. Okay, what we need. And that's what I would ask for coming the budget session. At Wednesday, Belada Ikle, at budget and find Division of Natural Resource budget ni aki a cut to hit out the change is now out up a line. So again, the way I would say is okay, there was an opportunity for the grading officials to raise their issues and concerns this budget process. Up a lance lento a token it not the initial coming August, October 1st. Okay. What happened? Where was everyone during the budget development? Joshi did this shit. So at Quaggy been getting has at in the Banate at the budget and Lenigi. A Coela Quaggy height. In a baby Kaigi. Well, she does need then did so see to be straight after he lay Kotosa. Ben happy be yestito, ben Shokatun that the horses. Or I mean, we're okay. And okay, if that is the case, that's one less area for me to worry about. Maybe we go on to the next area that really are in dire need of other funding as well. So, other than that, Chairman, maybe my request to the local grazing officials is that they just need to provide us some form of a statement to say that. Yes, they're okay with what they have and how they have the work relationship with the Department of Agriculture. That way, we'll just go ahead and focus on making sure that their stipends are processed in a timely manner. But that will be an overall system across the Navajo Nation of whoever gets stipends. In this particular area. And then, of course, there was a recommendation, okay, but now 125, Title 3, so maybe that's another area that the council could look into to say that, okay, that's another area that could be a recommendation. But nonetheless, there's so much that we could talk about, but it's just a matter that what we want to talk about and focus on sometimes there's a drawback for us, which is the case today, that there wasn't much that needs to be discussed over Navajo. I guess I just need to say that I know some will probably be disappointed with me, some from my area, from the Tele agency, that I just probably just take a step back and then have the grazing officials provide their input or statement. But how do we address the area? 2 years ago, do we ask for a new document to say that, okay, the 2 years ago, open up a listen that but the one thing I really wanted to push for was an agency office for each of the grazing officials. The ASC, so not everything is in Windrock. So that's what we're trying to push as well. The Anhiego National Ski other places on the that was the other focus that we were trying to do. If the grading official believes that everything is okay being administered out of the Windrush area, I mean, then let that be it. Then call it Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Gay, for advocating on behalf of the grazing officials, and I know the land board as well. So, bananas ini gait alla at eho. Bananas ini banachne picture, which is laid on an tagabad or nation in a gitcho by el kiko and con. But did it try kitten, Celine, con, John the hot ego grow. Revenant Asani Jahasti Hut Endi and the agency then so not source written statement either the resolutions done Jahades Ahoshin put out on it in the dean need or a bonet zado jo any recommendation at either follow up because she or job at a seat link at every got data executive officers done Lenny 3 executive officers from each of the 5 agencies Akoya either done stop and leadership meeting Iliago ada nature hatatot to aban see case that done it ako hot relation and ako to sashbahna station and nasanike.
Chairman Ness, this is Delegate Crotty. May I ask Department of Ag a clarifying question on the finance issue?
You most certainly can ask a question, Honorable Crotty. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, committee members, and all of the support staff on the line. Mr. Watchman, if you could help me understand when your staff input the claims for the grazing officials, is Department of Agriculture, are your staff, are they trained in the 6B? Are they making the direct payments, or is the issue that it's still going through the Office of the Controller's process, and their policy is first in, first done? So I'm just trying to make sure we know what the recommendation is. If your staff is not 6B, what's the timeline to get them trained? And then the second question is, what would be the recommendation that BNF can make to finance to either prioritize or streamline the financial process? For example, when I was on HES, we worked with BNF to prioritize veterans payments. And so we had to work weekly with the Office of the Controller to make sure those documents were submitted correctly. So there was some internal issues that needed to be dealt with, and then making sure those payments were prioritized. So if I could get some idea in terms of how grazing officials payout is organized, that could help me, and in our discussion with BNF and RDC in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Crotty, for your question. Mr. Watchman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very good question, Delegate Crotty. And going back to the 6B, we are not on the 6B at this time, and our timetable. Yes, we do need to be certified. There's another issue regarding that sort of complicates it. Not being certified, but we're under a payroll, and so when the settlement took place, basically moved everything from once was accounts payable to payroll, and payroll requires under statute documentation. Not to say that general accounting didn't or accounts payable didn't, it's just that it became under a new system, which is under a bi-weekly format. So that bi-weekly format coincides. So again, the quick way they say is that, say there's a meeting on the 6th of, or today for that matter, we would have to have that meeting siphon information into the system, whether it's the 6B or into finance, before they had the paper ending. That's how they're paid. Years back, which was only, I guess, 3 years ago, it would just fall under accounts payable, which we could submit any time on a reimbursement. So as we have changed, that's where it became difficult. The requirement is right now is original documents, whereas when it was under accounts payable, there was some leeway on those documents, so someone could submit it via email from a chapter and send it in, and that would be accepted and paid. But under the payroll document, that's not accepted, because they equate or they transfer the meeting documents, meaning a bona fide meeting has taken place, and that's what is compensated into a payroll system. And that's so what we're asking in terms of streamlining would be those documents could be electronically submitted versus hard copy, and that had worked fine. Beyond that, we don't answer the question that whereas the local chapter or local grazing official is wanting is they want to be paid like they were 3 years ago, within a day or 2 days, which when we're under the accounts payable system, that would happen based on whoever's assigned by alphabetical order. But right now, even under what we're proposing, if it goes to community development, it would still be under a biweekly pay cycle, according to the IRS settlement, as a employee. So, in terms of advocation to BNF, we were hoping that we could maybe streamline the required documents for a claim to be submitted under the current system, first and foremost. Secondly, is being certified. Yes, that is our charter right now, to be certified. I'm not sure if it'll really help expedite, because it's a bi-weekly process, but if I'm not confusing you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watchman. And also, Department of Justice, and also Mr. Willie from the Controller's Office. I would like to ask what the proper legal way to establish district grazing officials programs at the agencies. That'll be the first question. So we as RDC would know how to go about to get there on this route. And perhaps next year the committee can follow a process for the budget season for that purpose. So my question to DOJ and the Controller's Office is, what would be the proper and legal way to establish district grazing officials programs at the agencies? Mr. Rodas?
Mr. Chair, can you hear me? This is Mel Rodas.
Yes, go ahead, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would think that the first step would have to be amending the plan of operation even before you get into the budgeting aspect of it, just creating the offices through the plan of operation. But I would also defer to my colleagues with the Natural Resources Unit of DOJ, who I believe might be on the line as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next. Mr. Willie? Press star 6.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Yes, I believe what Mr. Rodas spoke. I agree with that. Looking at the process and the individual agencies and what would be needed, I guess, an assessment of sorts of how you would like the program to run, and building that plan of operations around that particular, as using that as a guide to build your plan of operations would be my suggestion, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willie. Honorable members of RDC, any other comments or questions? None. I believe we've discussed in depth and received information, and also 3 of the grazing officials had spoken to the issue of electronic copies being submitted, and we also understood 90% of our grazing officials are receiving direct deposit for their pay. So we've heard a lot of good things, and perhaps we will just wait on the agency executive grazing officers to meet with and have a leadership meeting. That way they could make their recommendations in reference to these concerns and other concerns. If there's no other discussion.
Chairman Ness, this is Delegate Crotty with a follow-up question.
Okay. Honorable Crotty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. So at the leadership meeting, if I could respectfully request, or if there's ever been a conversation to transition grazing officials from a per stipend or by meeting just to a base pay. So the president, vice president have a base pay, delegates have a base pay. That might be the simplest move for payroll, because then the documentation will simply be, it'll be like a timesheet and not so much the sign in an agenda based off of meeting, but a base pay. If we could get some follow-up or consideration. Thank you, Chair and committee members.
Okay, Honorable Crowdy, that is a great idea to recommend a base pay for grazing officials. And perhaps when Ms. Begay, when we do schedule this leadership meeting, perhaps have on the agenda this topic for discussion is the base pay for grazing officials. And we would like to have the Department of Agriculture, Division of Natural Resources, Department of Justice, as well as Auditor General and the Office of the Controller to be on the line with us at that time. So thank you, Honorable Crowdy. Honorable Begay?
Chairman, the other area that I believe I mentioned this last week during the budget, Ecuador, the grazing official for the Navajo Nation, the Title III a lot of time the BIA reference in the CFR no. I think there was a request, and maybe our staff can work with our legislative council, and I'm not sure how many DOJ are still on the line. I believe that we're just supplementing the federal government on addressing some of their policy of our grazing official, because a lot of these policies that is being administered is through the federal government. General funding be we've talked about equity. We talked about fairness of how much the grazing official works. Washington, maybe that will be our focus to get additional resource. Every time that we ask a question to the department, there's always a situation where it's complicated. As administration, grazing official, but I'm glad that he's working with some grazing official, but I believe that all grazing officials should be included, and not just only the few. And I know some of my chapter officials during the pandemic, they're there and distributing food, distributing supplies, and so on. That's how far some of our grazing officials have gone. But yet they're not being paid of anything more than that. Yes, they volunteered, and then some of them are in different capacity at the local level. Grazing officials for now, it's probably going to be after the budget, because I thought by Wednesday we're going to be passing on the legislation to Budget and Finance and the Oversight Committee for RDC and then probably the first week of September, AJA budget the overall comprehensive budget Washington, land board. And I believe sometimes I'm sure I'll be corrected, but I always say that wherever these staff or officials are from, they're usually more concentrated in that area. In certain area of maybe the central part of the Navajo Nation were being neglected. I can say that on record. I think they really need to be at the table in this discussion as well. Why is what based on I don't hit not in Kikodo either with Banda deal quit down will I hit on so maybe that's another area that maybe we need to ask the BIA to come to the table and provide us some information, because a lot of time I kept hearing, I always hear, the last that I've heard, Division of Natural Resource, 7 million, what they needing it, the Schnitzel, in the Papa, Sata, Haj, Gulachos, in the store, based on Leniki, $7 million, which Yankee Lachit, other Chitatos in. that ego that's always in the plan. But not understood, but that in niche because budget been approved the yaki overall the master plan no by yet maybe the Division of Natural Resource provide us a master plan within that master plan because it's stated in the objective code. A objective code be the master plan had the door lindo had the natural the a call it late adon nitiki koto grazing officials what include Eliado Listo comparing to other offices, how much money is being allocated for the grazing official in percentage, how much are they being allocated based on the Nigi Nahagido Yena Listo Liki Ade Adon Jedi the officials done Linigido staff members done Linigi contributed or you Nahan Dacha. Ishin the ye that Chidi Zashiki Aj Khalid the big and Aslada, Quatinti grazing officials gay up a Chidik and Asla, other that port up and the insurance and Aslada and so on, the Baban Saha case or Baban Sas case or additional Zinke. If that is what you officials do, Senegi grazing official, if that's enough for you, I mean, Ishin what Ishin or this boat. But what ended to some areas, I believe, there's grazing fish, Chita, Kak, what out, Ebenanish, or you, that your son, or you, Jacodo, be Baban Saske, Shisazingi, so what are enhanced Saske, or additional grazing fishes, and Fleniki, a coco, Junon Das, Nisto, and Junon La, Nahasalaki, Bahini Zint, or the what end, but what end in Latin, Diego, Sato. Which in the which in the Huit Naniki, Kodo, and the respects of that as elected official. But we need to provide more service for them because feral horse you can't see the Cheh, other big Hashita and other control that Nido Ko Kapeshi Kodat Eroko others another either no ko Kodosa Higo and Habit Stone Habit with Ago Ade to Hajoya Nation short at the Nigo. I hear two different things and I see two different things. That's unhalim because of what I see at the local level. My chapter is just as Low Mountain, Touchy Blue Gap, Solana, Cottonwood, Nosley, and many farms. Maybe my focus could be only those 5 chapters. If other officials or grazing officials are working, maybe ask the Division of Natural Resource to focus on my 5 chapters. Be a chairman, like for that to happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Begay. What we'll do is when we have our meeting, we'll include BIA to be on the call with us as well, so they can also offer and respond. Yes?
Yeah, this is Leslie Williams again. I would like to request for the floor again. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Key Almbeke. Yeah, Chicago. Department of Ag and Genova Snowba has 3 Nidia. AD paperwork administratively key AD by yesterday. And now the end has the own chicken has on AD key 8 hot. 8 hot of that deal call. Almost every chapter she went over to husband. ARG key 8 that work will never be done and we'll never get out of it. That not a hard she went on it for God only. So hot open yen and so then tell that I had not open yes that you need to have a call go a that you be the hut and seeing it out a call go hand this is uneaten the benant at a long go by young skill go to about Hunson. So I was by his nose they get a call go deep the chapter peso in the note that the Department of Ag they install the nego but yatil here. Peso the and taki the that direct deposit the then keep it and then it speeds up the process and but Passion so called and now nego budget of not or nego no NATO no. One of the main things that I'm really concerned about is the NPL. It's combined Joint Committee, 15 chapters. A by Yanski, A Kato, Yaski, and the okay, Zinit Nahanot and P. So called that, I got Yevo. Be not it, hello, what thought. It is Okroba and over him, so this is all. Yeah, credit on that. Thank you.
Kushila, if you have Mr. Williams,
Honorable Chairman Nez.
Yeah. So, who's this?
This is Tanner Begay.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Tanner Begay, you have the floor. But we've allowed a few grazing officials to come on and provide their concerns on their stipends. So we'll give you a few minutes to speak, Mr. Begay.
Thank you, Honorable Delegate Nez. I'm Tanner Begay with Tiso Sacat chapter in Burnham, New Mexico. And I appreciate you allowing me to have the floor, Chairman Nez, regarding the purpose of this meeting. And in my opinion, for the transfer of the grazing officials program from the Department of Agriculture to the Division of Community Development, personally, I oppose this, and I do not agree that the grazing officials program shall be transferred from Department of Agriculture to the Division of Community Development. I can say that in the past, our previous grazing official with Burnham chapter stated before I was elected in the community that then when the local chapters had the authority to pay out to the grazing officials, he told me that it was better for him. But when I was elected, that had changed, and that responsibility was transferred to the Department of Agriculture. Now, the Department of Agriculture, as Leo Watchman has stated, that there's only 4 individuals who oversee a majority of the grazing officials and the land board members. And these 4 who oversee our claim forms already have the knowledge of how to get them processed. They are knowledgeable on the account numbers. And if it wasn't for the Department of Agriculture, I wouldn't have received an agenda. Now, Dr. Pearl Yellowman did state that Division of Community Development is overwhelmed already, and I believe that the Department of Agriculture is overwhelmed with the amount of claim forms they received from the grazing officials, but they have it under control, and I think they're doing a very good job on that matter. And I think that when it comes to the budgeting process, now that it is in discussion with RDC, what concerns me is that we have an amended plan of operation where the grazing officials receive a stipend of $125 for each meeting, $200 a month for their mileage, and the $800 per month for their payroll. So according to our plan of operation, one of our duties and responsibilities is to preserve the forest, the land, and the water resources. And when it comes down to that statement in our plan of operation, one of the activities that we perform is horse roundups and entrapments. And at the time when the horse rewards program was funded by the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, a lot of the Navajo Nation's community members participated in that program in removing wild horses from the rangelands, and they got paid for it per head. But when the grazing officials participated, they weren't allowed to receive any compensation for any of the work performed because it was stated in their plan of operation. I think it would benefit the grazing officials if the Resource and Development Committee and the Budget and Finance Committee looked into that matter and trying to help and assist the grazing officials with part of their budgeting and their payroll. So thank you, Honorable Delegate Rick Nez, for this time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Begay, for addressing the concerns and also making it known that you do disagree with the transfer of programs to the Division of Community Development, and that you did state that you're working fine with the Department of Agriculture, so which is good to hear. RDC and Budget and Finance should look into the matter of having the grazing officials' budgeting and payroll be looked into. So what we're going to do, Mr. Begay, is have a leadership meeting with the executive officers of all 5 agency grazing officers to express some concerns that they have, not only with this payment of their stipends and how we could streamline them, but if there's other issues that need to be discussed, it'll be all placed on the agenda itself also. So thank you for your statement. Honorable members of RDC, do you have any other comments or questions? We'll have a leadership meeting and really go in depth with what we need to be discussing. So here, Nanda, Arot Bemland, Arnold Senegi, go that and Hinanish or Enigi, and Hake Hints and Rod the Nation Hakens and a hot tally kappa or Eropana Hado. Banashin Lenigi Banachin Ben Han Sahake given in his cropish was unnate Lenigin Hikadi the Westo Ben Hitchen out Egiben Hitrosne the Ninigation Bahadol just so here. Thank you, grazing officials. Honorable members of RDC, one more time. Any other discussion? Then go how your hundo next. We will move forward with the Division of Natural Resources budget along with the Department of Agriculture as we understand it. Since there's no other comments or questions, we will adjourn at 5:12 p.m. You all be safe out there. Tomorrow, RDC, we do have a leadership meeting again early in the morning at 8 o'clock and another one. So thank you. Be safe out there and dig in. May God bless each and every one of you. Be safe.
Thank you.
Oh.